How many of you ever worked on farms? So a number of you worked on farms. When I was, I think they call it child labor now. But when I was, like in middle school, from about 10 to about the time I was 16, I got farmed out to the farm, the family farm. And, I would go from Lionel Lakes, Minnesota, up to Staples, Minnesota, Burndale to be precise. And there I would work on my uncle's farm, and there he taught us how to, take weeds out of the soybeans and out of the cucumbers that he would plant. And so when you got there, you had to learn about weeds. Not only just the crops, but you had to learn about weeds, and there were like these ton of cockleburs. And cockleburs, I don't know if you know cockleburs, but they have shallow roots. And if you just take a hoe and chop them off, about a week later, they're all right back. So you gotta get down, you gotta get there with your fingers, you gotta dig it up, you gotta pull them up by the roots. And then, you throw them in these little piles and you keep going. And now the other thing would be like milkweeds, right? Now milkweeds, they have long tap roots, right? I mean, you go around the farm know this, right? If you ever had to weed acres of soybeans as child laborers, basically, you know that you don't pull up a milkweed by the root. It does no good because they shoot out these like runners, and they just, you pull out one and 3 more come up. So with a milkweed, you got to hack them off and let them bleed to death. You don't just take them out. You hack them off, and then they slowly bleed to death. Now that's probably a lot more about weeds than you wanted to know. But the text is about weeds today, weeds and tares, and something that gets sown into our lives. And Jesus knew his weeds, at least in the terms of this parable. And what he was probably talking about was called the bearded darnel. And it looks like ryegrass. And so if an enemy were to sow this grass, this ryegrass, or this bearded darnel amongst your wheat, they look identical. They look identical until they come up. And then, then you realize that the ears appear very different. The ears appear very different. So he knew this. And so as he's telling this story, he says, look, it's a lot like the world around us. It's a lot like the world within us. I mean, what do you know? What do you know in your own lives about weeds and wheat? About some good seed planted in your own life, and yet some destructive force that just seems to eat away at it. What do you know about weeds and wheat in your own lives? They taste different. If you let them get that big and then eat them, yeah.
I have a tendency to see the weeds and not see the wheat.
Sometimes I see the weeds and I don't see the good seed within me. That's something to look at, I mean, it's almost like the weeds are choking out the very good seed, right? Yeah. What else do you know about that? I'm sorry, Betty, I couldn't hear that. Help me, somebody repeat that because I can't hear it. Oh, they're hard to get rid of, that little nuisance within us. Oh, yeah, I'll change tomorrow. Mañana, pues, right? That was like a favorite saying in Spanish, right? Mañana, pues. Hey, when can we get to this? Mañana. Oh, really? Then it's mañana, then it's tomorrow, and then you go, when can we get to this? Mañana. Right? I mean, it's kind of like, that's what we do with our own weeds, right? That's what we do with those little things that sort of suck the nutrients out of our own lives. Mañana, pues, I'll get to it. Right? And in the meantime, they're growing up, and they're growing up. And in the garden of our souls, I mean, what happens? What happens? I mean, what happens when our weeds and our seeds look so much alike? Sometimes the weeds take over. What does it look like to have a weed take over in your life? It becomes all-encompassing, overwhelming. It becomes all-encompassing. It becomes overwhelming. Yeah. when the weeds start taking over, and I don't know, you can name your own weeds. I don't have to have you describe them here. Unless you really want to. I mean, I don't know, you got cockleburs, you got milkweeds, what do you, I mean, you got crabgrass, what do you got growing there? Just weeds. Just weeds.
I find that my weeds don't need a lot of care and nourishment. I mean, they can thrive no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know if you all heard that. You know, it seems like our weeds can thrive no matter what. They seem to nourish and thrive. And yet, what is it about ourselves that we just have such a hard time nurturing the good seeds within us? Because they're there. The sowers planted them. Jesus says, the Son of Man has planted good seed in your souls. So what happens here? What happens to these good seeds?
We see ourselves as sinners or unworthy or not measuring up.
So sometimes even our own doctrines can get us down.
Otherwise, we think, well, we're prideful if we think we're good. We better not.
Oh, yeah,
There's
okay.
something good in us that's egotistical.
I know you told me you grew up in Massachusetts, but you sound like a Minnesotan, you know. I mean, I can't feel good about myself. Feeling good would be like selfish. So I must feel miserable. And if I feel miserable, then somehow God must be present. That is so Minnesotan. That is so Minnesotan. It amazes me. I mean, this is like the stoic Scandinavians. You know, having a good time today? Maybe. Maybe. Right? But I mean, you know, so we have a hard time allowing those good seeds to grow in us because even our own doctrine sometimes says, oh, we're selfish and we're sinful and we're unclean and we're miserable and we got to be this way. And how does even that doctrine keep us from understanding this half of the story that God has planted good seed in us? Seriously, how does that doctrine get in the way? That Christ says, I have planted good seed. Well, we know we don't measure up. The weeds are still choking us out. And isn't that the truth about weeds? That's exactly what they do, you know. They take the nutrients from the good seeds and they grow off of it and they choke it out. Well, so what's choking you in your lives today? You know? I mean, how can our faith even be choking us if we don't have perspective of grace? How is it that we always focus on the sinful, unclean nature and not the graceful nature that Christ cleanses us? That somehow we are clean, somehow a good seed has been planted. I mean, if we wallow in just one side of the faith, we're out of balance. The good seed and the bad seed are present. They're present. We can't deny it. But you cannot just focus on one. This is precisely his point. You can't be ripping out the weeds at the cost of the wheat. You can't be consumed with the weeds in your life at the cost of the good seed. Sometimes we just have to examine our souls. Sometimes we just have to look at them, see how they're growing together, and see what they have to teach us. And then you can distinguish. Here's the seed of grace. Here's the seed of love. Here's the seed that's been planted in you. This is the seed to be harvested. Amen?
Amen.